This is great. We're going to talk all about the psychology of aging happily with Raylene Montner, PhD. And you know from what you speak, you talk about so many people over the age of 50, and we're all going to age, and we should do it gracefully and happily. How did you come to your thoughts about this?
You know, it's interesting because Marcus Tullius Cicero, who was a Roman statesman in about 44 BC, he lost everything. And he was in his 60s. He was divorced. He was left by his wife. He lost his daughter. His daughter died. He lost his political standing when Caesar came into power. And he turned to writing. And what he wrote about were the joys of aging. And he said, so many of us hope to get to old age, Anne, and then when we do, we complain about it.
How human of us.
So, you know, instead of focusing on how wonderful it is that we're still here and all the things we still have, and I think because older adults over 50, you know, we can't be who we were when we were 20. We can't look the way we looked when we were 20. Our body changes. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a natural process. But we are faced with more challenges than we were when we were younger. You know, age-related disabilities, in some cases worse than others. You know, social isolation in some cases. It's harder to make friends at a certain age. We're faced with the stereotypes that so many people have about older people. As I wrote on my website, Betty Davis said, old age is not for sissies. And it's really not, because we need to learn how to be visible again instead of invisible.
Why are we invisible after a certain age? Because I hear people say that all the time. It's like I'm not even in the room.
It's interesting. It's almost a cultural thing. I recently came across a study that came out of one of the universities in Switzerland, and they talked about where are these stereotypes coming from about old age, you know, not having value, whereas centuries ago, you know, the philosophers were the older ones. They had the wisdom. Now it's like we don't respect that very much. What they found was that a lot of times that comes from who our role models are. And when they asked people who their role models for older age are, the ones that chose people in their own families were the ones that had the most positive impressions of older adults.
Interesting. And you have dual citizenship, Italian,
yes, I do.
American, and you were just telling me about, you were around the whole family, and you learned from grandparents. In society now, we move. We move far away from our families. So we don't have that same core that you had.
It's interesting, you know, I called my family in Italy for Pascha, for Easter, and we were talking about in the little village where my father's people are from, the younger people still remain at home with their parents. When they get married, usually it's the wife that goes into the husband's family and cares for the grandmother who's ever there, and you know, the son stays with his parents and brings the wife in. So there's always someone around. Older people are not isolated. They're not living alone. They're living with family, with babies, with the great-grandchildren, with the grandchildren, and it's all a big unit. We were lucky enough in Fairhaven to grow up in this little Italy when all of the, you know, our immigrant grandparents came over. My grandmother, one of them had a meat market. They all had their own little businesses. Sure. They worked hard. Life to them was about working hard, being proud Americans, doing their very best to sustain their family, and still enjoying life. And that's who I learned from. My grandfather had a shoe store, and he was one of the kindest people in the entire world and made such an impression on me that I miss him to this day. If he saw somebody walk by carrying a baby with no shoes or no slippers, he would call them. He never made a cent. He would give his shoes away or his slippers away. And he loved his work so much. It's what Csikszentmihalyi, and I hope I pronounced that right, the researcher that came up with this notion of flow. When you're so passionate about your work, it's not like work. You're immersed in it, and it makes you happy, and it makes you get up in the morning. And he always put on a tie to go down to his little shoe store. And if he didn't have customers, he would be out on the railing, leaning over, and saying a good word to everyone.
Where are those times?
I know. I desperately miss him. And he used to say to me, it's just as easy to have a kind word to say, to give someone a lift, as it is to complain about, you know, it's snowing this morning, which of course I was complaining about.
Not the end of the world, but you know, we want summer. So you've written 3 books, you're working on a 4th. Living La Dicha Vida, Dolce Vita, Lemons into Limoncello, which I love that, and Change Your Mind, Change Your Weight. The 4th one, what's the title of the 4th one?
The 4th one is going to be Aging Happy, How to Knock Out the Nonsense and Live the Best Years of Your Life. And I give a blueprint based on all of the research on happiness and how people, when they get past the age of 50, could really focus on cutting the superfluity. Is that a word? Superfluous.
It sounds good to me.
It sounds good. But Piero Ferrucci, one of Italy's foremost psychoanalysts, talks about cutting out the superfluous things in life, and that's more important when you age. It's more important when you age to get down to brass tacks when it comes to your body and how you take care of it. And a big part of that is body age, a body image, which is what my doctoral dissertation was about, body image, cross-cultural comparisons. And what you find, and I don't know if you hear this when, you know, you're in your circles or your friends, or you hear, you know, friends of friends say, oh, I can't stand this turkey neck, this blah blah waddle, this muffin top, this violin deformity. We've got all these self-berating names for ourselves instead of just, you know, getting down to brass tacks, taking care of your body and accepting it for being human. And one thing I learned, you know, from my grandparents in Italy is that a few pounds don't matter. It's, you know, it's really about being proud of who you are, being confident, and respecting yourself. So when you're younger, taking care of yourself and looking good, what Italians call a bella figura, even though this 4th book isn't based on Italian traditions, but they're still important. When you take care of yourself, when you're younger, it's vanity. When you're older, it's self-respect. You know, respecting yourself, dressing up because it makes you feel better, and it presents yourself, you present yourself better to the world. So that's important. This social isolation, which a lot of older people are prone to, and especially, you know, we were talking before taping, or before we went on, about the pros and cons of this kind of connected age, connected to technology. And one of the things is that we have to make sure that as we get older, we're not so engrossed in social media that we forget about what really creates happiness and longevity even is our face-to-face contact with people.
Well, we talked about the art of conversation. It's really hard for a lot of younger people to do that now because they're not used to it.
They're not used to it.
Just the art of us having a conversation over a table is delightful because I get to look at you, you get to look at me, we get to really see in our eyes, we get to speak words to each other. How did you end up in psychology? How did you end up in this realm? What brought you here?
You know, I first went to law school. Not many people know that. And I majored in political science. I went to law school. I thought that was going to be my calling. And then when I started doing mock trials, I thought, I'm not going to, you know, get up there and cut anyone's throat over this. I mean, this just isn't me. These were my friends, and I was like going up again. And I thought, no, leave this to the people who, you know, everybody has a calling.
Sure.
And I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. And then to try to figure myself out in a way, I think most people go into psychology because of that. You know, they want to figure themselves out. They want to know about personality. They want to know why they are the way they are, why the people around them think the way they do. And I found it fascinating. So I took my first psychology course as a graduate student, and I never looked back. I just found it fascinating. But likewise, when I applied for a doctorate, I got accepted into both doctoral and the educational cognitive psych that I got accepted into. And I thought really hard about what I wanted to do. And when I had gotten my master's, I started teaching, and I loved that. And I thought, self-help. Because, Anne, there's a place for therapy, and a good one, and many gifted therapists out there. There's a place for group therapy, private therapy. But if you fall and skim your knee, you don't run to the emergency room. You put a Band-Aid. You clean it, you put a Band-Aid on it. So there is a whole place that's neglected, and that's the self-help realm. Because a lot of people, and even therapists, a lot of them are recommending self-help books as adjuncts to therapy because they give you a boost, they give you a blueprint if they're good. And I'm not talking about the self-help books that are just advertisements for paid websites or products or what have you. But if they're based in research and the person is coming at it with, you know, I want to be able to teach this. So I found that the classroom, as much as I loved it, was limiting in a way. And I started writing books as my larger classroom. And books are not like easy or even pleasant to write, I have to say that, but you do it because you have a calling to do that.
The first one that you wrote, Living La Dolce Vita.
Living the Sweet Life.
What's it about?
You know, I learned principles that I wanted to preserve and conserve from my grandparents that I grew up with. And the joys of family. Family is your chalkboard. You can't choose family, Ann, but you learn from everyone, good and bad.
You can pick your friends, not your family.
That's it.
We hear this all the time.
Exactly. And not all family is supportive. It's wonderful when they are. It's wonderful when they're loving, and there's a nice close bond in most Italian families. And there are also those relatives that, you know, you don't want to be seated next to the wedding next to or what have you. But you learn from every single one, because in family, and this is what we always learned, around the dinner table especially, not many people eat together anymore, but that's where you learn about life. That's where you learn how to go out into the world and be who you are and draw your boundaries and know where you stand. You learn that from family. So every player in your configuration is important to who you are and who you're going to be in life. So that's familia. The other thing were the simple joys of life, la simplicità. Very, very important. We go through our days and all these simple joys that we have at our disposal go unnoticed. And we wonder, where did the day go? You know, where did the month go? Where did last year go? Wasn't it just like 2017? And now it's 2018. And the reason is because we're not focused. Now, Leonardo da Vinci spent his career observing. He was actually the forerunner of the scientific method, you know, osservare. He observed water flowing down, cascading down, rivers flowing, birds flying. When you stop to be conscious of what you're doing, we're talking right now, whether you're enjoying a meal, whether you're with a person, the days don't fly by. You develop an appreciation for them. So that's the simplicity of life. Life, they call it in Italy, le piccole grandi cose della vita. The little, but yet great things in life. They're simple. Go to the laundromat and you start a conversation with someone. Seems like nothing, but it's really pleasant.
Someone's telling you a story.
Exactly, and it's uplifting.
So the aging baby boomer population, at least in this country, what do you want to say to them as a whole? How do you go forward? Because many of them feel very vibrant, and it's not, you know, the 60 of yesterday. It's a new 60.
Absolutely.
Which is terrific. And seizing the day and, you know, spending time on Facebook all day. And you're right, the days go, and hours have to count now as you get older, because you have so much time left.
Yes.
Not to be glass half empty.
I like the way you said that. It is true.
But you have to live with urgency.
So here's, and I do agree with that, and here's what I think people need to do when they get to be that certain age, which I am, is number one, you cut out, again, the superfluous things in your life, whether that be the things you have accumulated, and there's nothing like moving, like a lot of people downsize at this stage in life. Downsizing is one of the great lessons in life. It gives you clarity. It makes you recognize how little you really need and what's important and what's not. And most of those things, I would say 3/4 of the things you have are probably not important to your life. The things that are the things that, let's say, the heirlooms you have that were handed down, those photographs of your grandparents, or, you know, those special moments in your life, the people in your life that you now more than ever, especially when you get to be this age, you start losing people in. You start losing parents, you start losing friends, and you realize how precious those people are in your life. That's where you make the time, not on social media, but you make the time to see them. And you appreciate them and you let them know. And that comes with cutting out the people that are drags on your energy.
That don't feed your soul.
Absolutely. You have to do that. You have to do that. Just like you downsize in your home, you have to downsize your social life. Not to the point where you don't have enough of social interactions, but that your social interactions are meaningful. And I also think it's really important when you get to a certain age in life that you have a pet or two or three, whatever you can do, because pets are so therapeutic. There are moments in your life when you're going to be alone. Sometimes you don't even expect it. My husband died suddenly at the age of 57. Did I expect it? No. Which is why I wrote Lemons into Limoncello. Eventually I wanted to document my journey and how things that helped me get through that. But you lose people suddenly, and how are you going to get through this? Believe it or not, when you have a pet at your side, you always have a reason to get up and go out into that sunshine and say hello to people and live, you know, feel the warmth of living. So another thing that I found from the research for baby boomers who are aging is that it's very important how you spend your leisure time. So plan it and be picky about it. Don't just, like you said, don't just spend your night in front of, other than this show, in front of, you know, endless, like what they call
mindless stuff.
binge watching things. But you have to really plan your activities for things that are going to make you happy when you engage in them. So, you know, follow your passions. If there's a lecture going on at Yale or a concert, a lot of the concerts at Yale are free and they're wonderful. I mean, talk about filling your soul up with this beautiful classical music, or a cello concert, or a guitar, 4 guitars playing. Where do you hear that? And it's all free. So things like that, things like writing. A researcher named Pennebaker talked a lot about the therapeutic value of journaling. And you hear so many people say, oh, I wish I could write a book. And you hear them say that 10 years ago. You
They
hear
never
them
do
say
it.
that. They never do it. So just sit down and do it, whether you want to publish it or not. Sometimes just journaling helps you to sort out your emotions, helps to calm you down, and you really get a lot of value out of it, and it also helps you to increase your level of happiness. That's what research finds.
In all your books, your speaking, your radio show, and everything else that you do, including some acting, which we'll talk about in a second, have you found the joy that you thought you'd find?
Absolutely. I absolutely love every single day, and sometimes people tell me I'm too happy, so I even wrote an article about this. Can you be too happy? Well, the answer is yes, believe it or not. According to the research, you can be too happy, and I'll tell you why. If you're too happy in a situation that's not optimal, you have little motivation to better your situation. So you're just happy, you know, doing whatever. And let's say you have a goal, you have little motivation to actually reach it because you're happy. I could say, well, I'm happy, so why should I sit down and write, you know, this book, or, you know, what have you. On the other hand, if you're in a situation where you need to be 100% happy, like you're in a long-term marriage, you know, and people have flaws that start to grate on your nerves eventually, or friends even, that, you know, if you got mad at every friend that you got upset with, you wouldn't have any. So in that case, you can't be too happy. Being too happy is good. So just as an aside, yes, you can be. But people always say to me, you know, oh, you're so happy, you know. But I really feel grateful, and I think that's it. And you know, losing my husband was such a profound and awful circumstance. But you eventually learn, like the doctor who wrote the preface to that book, Lemons into Limoncello, the reason I asked him to is because I had read his book, one of his books, a few years earlier, and he said, when you're feeling sorrowful, when you've gone through loss, when you're feeling rejected or dejected or depressed, look inside. And if you look inside deep enough, you find the light and the tools you need to continue on your journey. So eventually, with all the resources we have and the grief counselors that are wonderful in the groups and so forth, you get to a point where you know you've got to take this journey on. And to know that we have those resources is a great source of accomplishment, satisfaction. I did it, but not only getting through this, but coming out to a place where there's a new page and a new chapter in life where you can say, life is wonderful, la vita è bella, like that movie. It is, no matter what you're going through, you could always get to that place where you think life is beautiful again. And there are always beautiful things in your life.
You need to be in everybody's house with all of what you said. Now the acting.
Oh, yes.
You're in a play called Italian Wedding Soup. How did this happen? Or have you always kind of dabbled in that?
Oh my gosh. You know, in high school, Anne, I loved acting. I was in the drama club and I acted there. And then a little bit when I had my first baby, I acted over at the Center for the Arts on Audubon Street. It was a church actually on State or Orange, I can't remember. And then you're raising kids and life gets in the way, etc. So I was having a conversation about a year and a half ago with somebody, and I said, you know, I used to act. And they said to me, well, why aren't you doing that now? And I thought, all right. So I found a little ad for a play they were doing at the Wyndham Theater. Now, it's pretty far from here, and they were doing it in the winter. I had no idea they called that strip Suicide 6 when it ices. What journey that was. I have thought I wasn't even going to get it. It had been so long. They were doing The Last Romance by Joe DiPietro, about an older man who falls in love, and his sister, his Italian-American sister, is very jealous of him falling in love because she wants to keep him for herself. And I went in there with my apron with the lemons on it from the Amalfi Coast and my dust rag. And they called me back. They said, you have the part. We can't imagine anyone else.
So you've got some acting chops then, apparently.
So I got right into that play, and we put that on at Wyndham Theater, and then in the fall, last fall, we put it on at CCSU. And in the meantime, I looked for another audition, and I see Bert at Pantacina, Bert Bernardi, brilliant. I had no idea how brilliant this whole team was putting on Noni Cimino's Kitchen. And he wanted somebody with an Italian accent, which of course I can do. And I went in there and I auditioned for him, and he said...
That's the name of it. I misspoke. It's not the Italian Wedding Soup.
This
that was another play.
This one is Italian Wedding Soup.
Oh, it is?
That's coming up on April...
Oh, okay.
April 20th to May 6th. Pantacino.com is where you could find out about it. But the first one last spring was Noni Cimino's Kitchen. And it was all about his grandmother. And, you know,
Did you play the grandmother?
I did. And it was, you know, it was wonderful. And it was the first time I sang in public.
Wait, you know how to sing too?
You know, that's a stretch, but yes. I guess I do because I did. And I actually got on BroadwayWorld.com Best Actress in a Musical for 2017 in Connecticut. And I'm thinking, but this team, Bert Bernardi and Jimmy Johannes Meyer, hope I said that right, and the musical director.
They're amazing.
Justin Rugg. Oh my gosh. I had no idea how amazingly talented they all were. And the whole play from beginning to end, and all the actors in it, most of them are regulars. I'm not, but most of them are. And they're just so incredibly talented. So I was so honored to be part of that. And then when Bert called me back and said he wants to put on Italian Wedding Soup, and would I come back? Of course I would. He just has a talent for the comical. And let me just say, when we're talking about getting older and baby boomers, it all fits in, because what you choose to spend your leisure time with, if you could go out and get a few laughs and laugh your cares away. You know, we're in a very uptight kind of zeitgeist now, and we turn on the news. You know, no offense because you're in the
no
news.
Offense taken. No offense. It's crazy. It's a crazy world.
But it is, and you know it is. So we need some kind of an outlet. So to be able to go and just relax and just laugh, you know, your socks off. That's what this theater is about, and it's music too. It's beautiful original music, beautiful original script. I'm so excited to be part of this. And what I like about it is, because you know I would never play anything that was the negative stereotype of Italians. I was the research director for the American Italian Defense Association, and we did surveys about stereotypes of, you know, Italians being mafia and this and that and what have you. So, but the way Bert does it, it's not the stereotype. It's a kind of a recreation of the warmth and the love of his own Italian family, his own Italian grandmother and aunts.
Which you can relate to.
Oh, absolutely. And I think everybody else, whether they're Italian or not, that came to that audience, they were just filled with joy. And many of them, I heard comments, just couldn't get the music out of their head for days and days and days.
So, in just wrapping this up, if I'm watching this, I'm over 50, which I am, what's the first thing you should do to start living a better life?
The first thing you need to do is self-care is always first. Make sure that you respect yourself enough to take care of yourself. Get down to business with what you're eating. Cut out the sugar or cut it way, way down. The sugar, the white flour, you've got to move as well. I don't care whether you go, I'm not a gym rat myself, but I exercise and I get out and walk every day and I do light weights at home. Whatever you do, in the old days they used to go out and chop wood and this and that. We don't do that anymore, but we have to keep the body as strong as we can out of self-respect, out of gratitude for having the body we have. That's number one. And number two is making sure that you nurture your social life, and that you get out there and you make the kind of friends that lift you up and not bring you down. So I think those two things are a good place to start.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on.
My
Raylene
pleasure.
Montner, we wish you luck in your next play and the one after that.
Oh, thank you so much, Ann. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Spend all night kissing and the bumper's right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked to find myself wishing I could find the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Need to keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. Skip right ahead to the last ride.